Hey, everybody, welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show for you planned out today. I'm very excited. We got a brand new face, Matt Jenkins, joining us, who we all know, the crew here knows, but maybe none of y'all know. So awesome to have you. We're going to get you an intro in a few minutes. But before I do that, everybody should be excited as I am and like the show. Subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, do all that good stuff. Get your emails in the morning whenever we go live, which is every day. So, with that, we are going to be talking about altruism. And if you have any thoughts, questions, comments, anything like that, put them up in the comment section so that we can engage them directly. Any thoughts before we dive in, before I get an intro from Matt? Yeah, good to go. All right, Matt, you're up. Give us 15 seconds. Who are you, where you come from, all that good stuff.
Hello. My name's Matt Jenkins. I hail from the small town of Castlegar, BC, about half an hour up the road from Shaun. I've known everybody here in various sort of acquaintanceships for the last couple of years, and happy to be jumping in, and hopefully I can impart some small shreds of wisdom aside from all the depths of knowledge that you guys have.
We are looking forward to it. Well, Seb, also, thank you for joining us 2 days in a row. Always good to get more time with Seb, so we're going to get into the rest of the conversation. Altruism. Altruism. Here we go. Altruism is the principle or practice of concern for the well-being and or happiness of other humans or animals. While objects of altruistic concern vary, it is an important moral value in many cultures and religions. It may be considered a synonym of selflessness or the opposite of selfishness. And I could go down a rabbit hole on that, but let's get some first thoughts. Seb, what are your first thoughts on altruism?
Well, to tie right into what we sort of ended with yesterday, for me, I always find it very interesting how we as human beings tend to make the determination of whether or not altruism is real in the context of what people are or aren't doing for who. And sometimes it's really difficult to know if there is a small measure of what's being done that's 100% truly altruistic, or if it's altruistic with an underlying benefit, which would be, for example, to if I'm doing something for somebody else and it makes me feel good, then there is a byproduct there. Provided that my intent is truly altruistic, then there's nothing wrong with having the little byproduct, which is me feeling good about what I'm doing, giving me a purpose, those types of things. So it's a conversation that's really always truly interesting to me, because it seems as though it is very difficult to have a conversation about anybody doing anything for anybody if that person isn't in front of you when you're having that conversation. And the conversation tends to go the way of trying to find out what is the actual underlying reason why somebody's doing something. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Interesting. Now, before we get any farther, I wanted to bring in Steve. Here he is, able to join us one more time. Good to have you, buddy. We're talking altruism, so I'm going to put you right on the fire. First thoughts on altruism. What do you think, buddy?
Well, let's do it. It's funny that I drove awfully spiritedly to get home to get on this, so I'm saying that in front of two law enforcement officers. So I'm glad you weren't out there. But honestly, once Chance told me the topic of altruism, I immediately went to kind of feelings of my own self, because recently in the high school, altruism is something that seems to be coming at an incredible cost. And when I think about the definition of altruism, like, selflessness is an awfully noble endeavor, but can altruism exist with the actual understanding and comprehension of the cost to self? I mean, that's where I see in my field the resiliency of the professionals in our field seems to be at an all-time low, if I'm being critical. But I also recognize that the people within my profession that are suffering, they don't necessarily have the skill set and the tools in their toolkit that we over here at the Collective have been striving to develop. And so what I would love to see is a sort of a merging of the two ideas of altruism, but also the cost of altruism. Because I believe if we can understand the cost, we can protect ourselves and sort of armor up a little bit, so that those who actually are practicing their profession with an altruistic intent, can they do so while also taking good care of themselves? Because what I'm seeing is an incredible cost to altruistic action.
That's an interesting question. I like it. Matt, what are your first thoughts on altruism?
I almost sound like a bit of a broken record with Steve here, but tying it back to like my world of being, first responder with the RCMP, I know that if you were dealing with something, you're recovering from something, it is to be able to share your experiences with others to try to help them out of their own traumas or experiences that they're dealing with. It's really important, again, to look after yourself first. You can't truly be beneficial to others being altruistic if you and yourself are still developing and working through things. And again, in my line of work, I think we all owe it to each other to a certain extent to have that fundamental ability to be altruistic. But again, doing it with good intentions and also making sure that you're not overextending yourself in your capacity to actually do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Shaun, first thoughts?
I'll try to keep it brief because it's really noisy here in the Sydney airport. But my first thought is based on what Seb was saying. And it is, do you know how often I've helped someone and they've looked at me and said, "Why are you helping me?" Almost that many times. You know, people like to accept help, but they don't like to follow on question with, "Why are you helping me?" And so that's an interesting angle for me, and I'd love to build that out, but I know it's noisy, so I'm going to throw it back to you guys.
I like it. I like it. That is an excellent start point. I'm going to come right back to you, Seb. What do you think?
Oh, this is going to be fun. Yeah, no, I really like, that question and that angle. I mean, ultimately, we need to know why we're taking on the things that we are taking on. And I think that not knowing what we're taking on is evidently going to lead us down potentially the wrong path, but potentially, make it more complicated for us to be caring for ourselves. But if you understand why you're doing what you're doing, if you understand, what is truly altruistic and what is somewhat self-serving in a part of your mission or your mission statement or your personal mission, so to speak, because I do believe that the majority of people that are out there helping other people are doing it for the right reasons. But I think it's important to understand exactly why you are doing it, because if you're just engaging in it because it's the right thing to do, can you control sort of how much energy you are giving out, and can you control where you are in space and time in relation to whatever problem was put to you? And so for me, it's as long as it's clear in my head, then I can have the conversations, I can help someone, and I can hold my space. That's an important piece, having the ability to hold your space when you're helping others. When I get on a Zoom call with somebody that's truly struggling, I don't take on their pain. I'm here to listen. I'm here to bounce stuff off. I'm here to provide, some hopefully helpful mechanisms or based on my knowledge, skills, and abilities. But I don't wear everything that people call me with, and you can't do that. And so it's important to have that compassionate approach, and it's important to have an informed approach, but it's also important to not emotionally be over invested in everybody else's life, because you're going to have your own things transpiring through your own life, and you need to have the bandwidth necessary to maintain, your own wellness, as it were. And so for me, is it in line with my mission I set forth, helping the collective with my skills, knowledge, and abilities, as long as it doesn't drag me down, the hole? And if a person has taken ownership of becoming better and they are receptive and all the things are in place, it takes a lot less energy than if you're trying to convince somebody to do certain things against their will. And so, yeah, those are all things that I keep in mind. And those are all things that I ensure I have clear in my head before helping anybody starts, on account of somebody one day will ask you the question, but more importantly, you need to have the answer to the question so that you may continue doing it in the right way.
I really like that. Matt, I'm coming to you. What are you thinking?
Pretty similar. Like I said, it's really easy when you've got people phoning you and saying, "Hey," and wanting to I don't want to use the term unload, but definitely when people are looking to you as a sounding board or people are looking at you for advice, it is really, really tough to separate you from them and listen. Sometimes just listening is better off because sometimes people don't really want to hear what you have to say. They just want to have somebody to vent to. But then if you are giving meaningful feedback or trying to give feedback, to go away from that conversation, and again, to not be wearing it, not have that loaded to your kind of emotional backpack and wearing that around on top of your stuff. So again, again, in my mind, it just circles back to, again, having your own coping mechanisms, having your own psychological well-being really grounded and at the forefront, so you can do a better service to others.
Absolutely. Steve, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I really like the idea that Seb brought to the table about holding our space, and I have become much more frequent a user of the term "you're not ready yet" when I'm working with people that are having their struggles and looking to me to solve them. Like, I can't solve anything for anybody. What I can be is I can be an empathetic and a compassionate ear and heart, and I can steer people in a direction. But the reality of it is as we know through Coaches Week, I mean, I love the conversations during Coaches Week about being transparent with people. And the number of times I've said in recent years to, in particular, youth, because that seems to be the basis of my work, is I said it to a girl today. This kid was chirping at me and essentially complaining and whining. And I said, "Kiddo," I said, "you're not ready yet." And they kind of looked at me like I was shunning them. And I said, no, please take my spirit of my comment. I'm not shunning you. And I'm just saying today, you're not in a position to actually start doing the work that I would set forth for you. I said, I'm going to be here tomorrow and I'll be here the day after that. And when you're ready to actually start taking some of this on and start doing the work for you, then I'll be right where you left me. And that means come back to me and we'll do the work. But I think that having the willingness to share with somebody that you're like, if you're feeling that they're not ready to hear what it is you're saying, then no matter how altruistic you are, they're not going to take it in. And that's where the burnout factor starts to come in, like whether it's empathy fatigue or compassion fatigue. We cannot wear it and we shouldn't wear it. And a term that's become more relevant it seems in education a little bit, is the term trauma dumping. So when people just want to trauma dump on you, that's not, I think, functional or all that helpful, to be honest. Because what they're doing is they're exercising their feelings about it. But then after all of those feelings come out, and if we don't have the ability to hold our space and not assume those feelings, the work that's after that is profound. And knowing where your limits are and knowing where you want to draw your lines or have your boundaries, I think that's an important piece of the puzzle for sure.
I really like that. My mind goes to like, saving a drowning person, right? You can't just swim over to them because they're going to drown you, regardless of how you feel about it or who that person was ahead of time. They're going to drown you regardless. You got to, you have to engage them from a place that they're ready. I have a couple comments here, and then I wanted to carry on with that line of thought. Just quickly, John Menard jumped in here. He said, "Thanks for making it, Shaun. Welcome guests and team collective. Always good to see you." John and Vanessa Chaos here. Good day, all. Hope your flight went well. Well, he's live, so...
Unless he's live from heaven.
Right, live from heaven, the Sydney airport. Here you go. Now, to that point, I want to talk about, holding space. I think that's an absolutely great point that Seb made. But the concept or the question I had for you guys was, we've all been involved in Pegasus Jump. We got the mental health walks. I was doing the walk for veterans. Like, we've all been involved in these programs where we give of ourselves to allow other people to have some space to engage in that process. But then how do we detach while remaining attached to said organizations? Because I think those things can be long-standing, but Seb and I, we were talking earlier about like succession planning too, was the fact that you have to be able to be ready to step away without those things disappearing, at least in my mind. What do you guys think, Seb? I'm going to come back to you first.
Yeah, so the context, we'll set up the context for what we were talking about earlier in the context of the mental health walk and the fact that the person that's running it is the sole person that, is engaged in it, or would be if nobody else had taken this on. But fortunately, I have guys like Steve and others, that have stepped up during the mental health walk to be able to pick up some of the slack in the event that I'm not around, but also in the event that I'm not around. Like you can't just have a great initiative that's helping people, that's out there and becomes something for people and is meaningful without you considering who's taking it on if you can't do it. And I always, start building these folks and creating that trust factor with the group, by providing small opportunities to speak, to have to provide some input, some valuable input, all this good stuff. And then they build their own trust and self-confidence. Once something happens and I need to be moving on, then I can tap into, one of the people that has been there and potentially even maybe somebody takes it on outright. And at the end of the day, that's all I can do. And so I'm going to have to move on. Life will continue. Life, as Shaun mentions all the time, is an adventure. And I don't want to be stuck in one place. I don't want to be doing the same thing all over again. And so for me, it starts right from the beginning, because I know that at some point there will be an exit strategy, but that exit strategy will happen when the group is ready and other people are there to pick up the slack. And so I think it's really important. Now, with that, you could also get to a point where, you've given enough of yourself to the cause and you want to switch it up. You want to do something else. You want to bring awareness or your skill set to another party, so to speak. And it's not that you're abandoning what you have done. Quite to the contrary, if you've invested in succession planning, then you're not abandoning anybody. But also, you can only take so many things on, and at some point you just can't go anywhere. You grew roots now, right? So you're rooted wherever you are on account of all the things that you have going on. And if you haven't spent the time to prepare properly, your initiative or whatever it is that you were doing for truly altruistic reasons could go down the wayside and find itself completely, disappeared, essentially.
Absolutely. Matt, you got any thoughts?
Yeah. Two thoughts. One, most of my connections that I've had the opportunity to, be a helpful ear to my peers is very grassroots, right? These are people that I know, that I work with, have worked for in various capacities. So it's hard to succession plan when you're doing it for, quote, your people. Right now, with an opportunity hopefully coming my way professionally, I'll be part of a big organization and very much one piece of the cog to ensure kind of the greater wellness when I'm needed to support peers that in a lot of cases I won't even know and won't be in my geographic area. So lucky for me, the succession plan on that front will be simple, because I'm called upon when I'm needed, and I can, help those folks, and I will have some degrees of separation there to preserve my own well-being. But yeah, it's interesting, because when I think about how the best way to be truly altruistic, if I could somehow do it and be completely anonymous, which of course wouldn't work because you need that connection with folks. But I think about how much more you can do with people if you truly had no recognition for it, right? And succession planning would be easy, because again, you would be easy to step away and leave it to the next person who is able to carry on the things you've started without necessarily having your face or your name attached to these initiatives. But of course, I can't fathom a way where you could possibly do that and be completely removed for something and be, an idea only, leaving it up to an organization or an initiative to kind of be your voice. That's I don't know how well I explain that.
Makes sense, though. I'm tracking. Steve, thoughts?
Yeah, my heart definitely keeps coming back to the word gratitude, because in some cases succession planning isn't necessarily possible. An example of that would be a program I've committed countless hours and blood, sweat, and tears, as Shaun likes to say, was a backpacking program our school has historically had for 29 years, and I was involved for 14 of them. And the fellow who was running that program is maybe the most altruistic person I've come across in my time, certainly professionally. And he gives and he gives and he gives. And this last season, where the hike was supposed to happen again, I was very involved in conversations about whether or not it was doable without him. And the honest answer to that question was, it's not doable without him, because of what he brought to the table. And I'm not saying that the people who could have stepped in were less than him, but the altruistic nature of what he believed in is what made that hike so special. We were simply the support for his cause, if that makes any sense. And I was very involved in that. I was his, essentially his right hand. And when he took a year away, I actually stepped into the lead facilitator and director role of that program, and it went very, very well. But when it came to the idea of taking on that program for its entirety, that's where we identified that the people that were involved with it just didn't have the capacity to own it right now. And what I spent a chunk of time having conversations with the original fella about was the gratitude and just the thankfulness that I got to be involved at all. And so take the mental health walks, for example. If Seb does make a transition, and if those of us that he's entrusted with it at times are not able to carry it on its original intention, then I would be left with a profound sense of gratitude that I got to be involved at all. And I wonder if that's okay sometimes. If something can not die, but something can maybe fade away for a little bit until it's reborn, or until somebody who's truly doing it for the right reasons can pick it up and do a solid job of it. I've become more and more okay with that in my older years, of just saying, no, I'm super grateful that I got to be involved, and I know that the work we did was good. And I think that's the key, is when you know you've done a good job of something based on whether it's feedback or life changes or people's like words to you directly. Like if we've done good work, then sometimes it's okay to say that's enough for now. And you know that the people you did the good work for, they will go forward and they will do good work in their realms. And I wonder if that's enough sometimes.
That's an interesting thought too. I really enjoy that. Shaun, you got any thoughts?
Well, it's not enough for me, and my apologies. Everyone's drinking beer at 8:30 in the morning and partying like there's no tomorrow. So sorry for the background noise. I'm not happy with that sort of a solution, because to me, if you're willing to give up on something, it's going to die for sure. That's just the way I look at it. And so, Chance, I'm going to throw this back at you. Do you recall the last time I said to you, bro, I'm going to chuck you the keys to the sports car and you're going to be driving it. Don't crash it. How long ago did I say that to you?
What, a day ago? 2 days ago?
Right, right. And do you know how many times I've said that? For the audience, I won't give the number, but it's a lot. As soon as I start getting involved with something, the transition plan occurs. I'm starting to put things in place immediately because I've just been through too many careers to know that I'm not going to be in this career forever. It's going to look different sometime in the future, maybe not the near future, but the mid future. And so my job, the moment that I took on this job, was to start creating someone to take over my job. And whether that ever happens or not is neither here nor there. What is important is Chance already knows that tag, you're it and don't screw it up. So I think whether we hope it looks after itself or not is not enough. I think, well, for me anyway, it has to be planned. It has to be tagged. You're it.
That's an interesting thought too, is that now this is a big what if, but altruistic, you have this program, you set this up, you're like, yep, okay, from the get-go, we're setting up plans to make sure that there's a succession plan. You step off and that person does crash the Corvette. Then what? Is it okay to let it just be like, well, I gave him the keys, it was up to him? Or is it like, well, now I got to go salvage this mess? Like, where do you go with that? Because I think that's an interesting secondary thought process in any type of succession planning. I'm going to go with Steve first. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I love that. I love that comment about crashing the Corvette, because I'm gonna push back a little bit on Shaun. I just spent the last day and a bit actually teaching his. You guys posted on the IG his little segment about ordinary versus extraordinary, and that really spoke to me in a profound way. And I've been teaching it to 90 kids in the last couple of days. Well, no, sorry, it's. what day? No, it is Tuesday today. Yeah. So I've been teaching it for the last couple of days, this idea of ordinary versus extraordinary, and the simplicity in which he said it, it's doing extra. And when we think about succession, to the level of success that we would like to see it, because we're in the guts of it, like we're and I'm and in terms of the collective, I'm certainly not at the ground level by any means, but I believe that when I'm on here, I'm offering all of me, because I believe in the cause, and I believe that I want to do extra by being involved with this so that the reach gets out there to those that are in need of it. And when we think about handing the keys to somebody, that's one of the reasons that I didn't take on this hiking program, was because at this stage in my life with the family and kids at this stage, and it's not excuses, it's legitimate barriers that have been very well thought out. I can't be extra enough to really have the impact on people at this particular moment in time. Doesn't mean that I won't be able to bring extra to the table in the future, but it's just for right now, having healthy understandings of our barriers and our current, our actual situations, because to overpromise and underdeliver to me is intolerable. That to me is more disappointing to my soul than anything else. I will always try to underpromise and then overdeliver by doing extra. And if I can calibrate those two and put those two together with clarity and execution, then that makes me feel good about my contributions. And so sometimes I feel like people are honored to be given the keys to something because it validates them and fills their bucket. But at the same time, do they have clarity on what they're actually able to do that's extraordinary versus ordinary?
That's an interesting thought. I like that. Seb, what about you?
Yeah. So, at the end of the day, what ends up happening is the product will change. It will evolve. It will be different. That's not to say that there will be less value in it. That's not to say that you can't realign the priority in line with the original mission, which I'm assuming in this case is wellness, for example, right? Like wellness of these young kids and achieving this through X, Y, and Z. Well, what does it look like if somebody else takes it on and that somebody else has different strengths and weaknesses as the person that originally did it? I know nothing happens at all. You're going to have, strength where strength lies, and you're going to have weaknesses perhaps where weaknesses lie. And you're going to try to, yes, of course, bring your entire game up. But at the end of the day, I think accepting the fact that things will change, they will transform, but necessarily not for the worse or for the better. They might just transform, and that's good generally, especially if the program's been going for a long, long time. I can guarantee you that there are blind spots. And we know there are blind spots because nobody was ever trained to take it over the course of time. So that's a massive blind spot. If a program's been on for 20 years, 2 decades, and nobody can take it on because nobody understands the intent of the original owner, well, the original owner didn't do a fantastic job of making sure that people knew what the intent was. Like you had 20 years to convince people to do that. And so I'm not suggesting that one person has to take it on either. Maybe if the person has had all kinds of times to invest in the process, and the person that's taking it on doesn't have that kind of time, is there some sort of delegation that can happen? Is there somebody else that can come in and supplement? Can we, half seize the work? Is there, and so really, as Shaun mentioned earlier, if you want to disable something in this life, all you have to do is to think about it for 10 seconds. And you will find all the reasons in the world not to do it. Right. So the question for me is always, how do I maintain the integrity of the intent in light of my own circumstances? How much time can I allocate to it? Who else could potentially come in and help me? Maybe we need 3 people to replace one. Who knows? Is there anything wrong with that? No, there isn't. Everybody has different circumstances and investment that they're able to do. And so the question then becomes, how important is the program? And that's any program. We're talking about Steve's program. The mental health walk is a different one. And then once we've established that, and once we've established a solid baseline, and our people are invested in the process, well, now they take a bit of ownership over that. It becomes, now I need your guys' help to figure out how we are going to keep this going, and who is coming in to do it, and how, how is it going to work. And then when you talk about, failing and crashing the Ferrari of the race car, crash generally, especially when it's in succession, is a lot slower than you might envision a crash happen, in a car. It's likely that, unless the person does something completely egregious that ruins their name or the name of the program or whatever the case may be, now you're looking at catastrophic consequences. But if you're looking at somebody that's taking something on, I am here. Like, the succession planning continues once I left. There is overlap before I leave, and then there's support after. And that's something that I've never been capable of doing, is completely leave and leave people to their own demise. I'm always here. I've been out of the force for freaking 2.5 years, and I still get people calling me, asking about how would you do this, that, and the other thing. And I've told them that I was going to be present for them to help them navigate whatever's coming up. So that's an important piece, Steve, when you're talking about, that continuation of that program. And then the question becomes, I have to look at cost benefit also. So what is the cost benefit? Well, if the baseline is low and people aren't getting a whole lot out of it, well, maybe the energy can be reallocated somewhere else where there's greater benefits. And that's not to say that this can be the exact same thing you were doing or morph into something completely different, but that use the first one as sort of a dive board, so to speak. Like, from this, we were able to establish this. And so, I think once you take something of importance on, and once it's yours, and you want to make it as valuable as you can, and you ascertain that you have done that, along the way, there needs to be who's taking that on when something happens to me, or who's there to help, or how many people do we need, or whatever the case may be. Can't let that go.
Matt, what are you thinking?
A couple points. Yeah, I mean, if there's initiative that somebody is stepping away from, and they pick me to transition into being at the helm of whatever that initiative is, again, like the gratitude and the ownership of that I would have to take would be immense, right? And to fail that initiative would be to fail somebody who has entrusted me with that, and it'd be to fail myself. So taking something on like that would not be something that I would take lightly. And to that point, if I'm looking to pass the keys to the castle off to somebody else, if it was an initiative that I had started, things will change, right? And I think to look at it as more of a transition than a succession is a good way to look at it, because if you are in the position where you're going to transition away from something and turn it over to somebody else, you have to be prepared for, again, for those changes, right? And it's not going to be precisely the vision that you had, because you are no longer the one heading it. Now, it doesn't mean, again, those changes are going to be bad. But again, as part of that transition, hopefully you are able to support that person when you have, quote, transitioned out, right? When they are leading it and still helping that person. If it's an important initiative to you, and if it is a person that is important to you that is now taking it on, again, succession is not like flipping a light switch, right? It's going to be gradual, and it's going to be sort of a continuum. So, yeah, and I think the piece is that, again, if you're transitioning away from something, there has to be some introspective thought to say, hey, you know what, like, yes, this is no longer my project anymore, and I think I've done all that I can to put the best person that I know in charge of it. But if things do change, and if this goes away, then I have to accept the fact that I'm proud of what I've done. I'm proud that I was able to transition away from this and have somebody willing to take it on. And sometimes these things happen, but not for your lack of trying to support that person after that transition. Sometimes things just fade away, and doesn't mean it's not necessarily a bad thing.
That is a great point. I've been thinking this whole time while you've been talking, you guys, is like Batman. I don't know why it just keeps coming up in my head. Batman is the fact that you have, the superhero, the one figure that is prolific across, fighting evil, doing good, all these things, blah blah blah. And I mean, you could use any superhero you want to use in this, but in terms of succession and altruistic intent, if you actually follow Batman, each different Batman is slightly different. And each successive storyline, plot line, artist is slightly different. It's not making it bad, but the idea is still whole, right? You keep that idea of what Batman is, then I mean anybody can do it. And so I'm wondering, I guess on this particular area is the idea of being that one man, or being, let me rephrase, being the idea, the core value here of having that soul intent at the very back end of any idea or any program or anything like that, the important piece to hammer on, rather than the who wears the friggin' cape or who wears the cowl or how pointy the ears are or whatever, right? Is it more important to have that idea really centered in your succession planning, or trying to develop the accoutrements, all the other stuff, and have that next person develop their own idea or intent? Matt, I'm going to come back to you. What do you think?
I love the idea of the idea, right? And again, I think that there's a lot that can be done if you are focused on helping your greater community without necessarily seeking, or not seeking any ignition, but not being in a position where you can gain recognition from it, so that when it does come time for things to change and for you to step away, it's not like the idea is still alive and somebody else is going to fill that role. Whereas if you, the person, are stepping away and you have become all encompassing over that idea or that initiative, then the traction may slow when somebody new is running it. That's my simplistic take on it.
I like it. Shaun, I'm going to come to you. What do you think?
A few things, and I'll make them super quick for the noise. First things first, I think if we're talking about race cars, well, the collective started off as a jalopy, and it actually had flat tires, and I didn't know how to change the spark plugs or the oil. Neither did Chance. And now we've got a bit of a race car, and guess what? Chance Burles has been the co-pilot the entire time, sitting in the passenger seat, learning how this thing's driven. So if I literally crash on a flight to Armadale in a couple of hours, big deal. Chance already knows how this thing's run, and he'll take over accordingly as per my direction. But I don't think that's going to be an issue in the near term, or maybe not in the midterm, because now to my next point, I think if we're talking about altruism, we should look at it through the lens of what kind of character, what kind of perhaps definition of altruism is this individual. Like for me, as an example, I'm okay with altruism to a point where I'm now bored, and then I'm looking for the next thing to be altruistic in. And that's why I've had several careers, because I've taken my careers to a point where I start to get a little bored. Not bored, that isn't the right word, but it'll do for now. I get to a point where I feel like my ferocity can be better engaged in something else that is going to make a massive difference. And as the bell curve starts doing this, if I'm up here, I'm bouncing, because I feel like my ferocity isn't providing the return for the collective that my effort is being put into it. And so some altruistic people, perhaps like Steve's friend, can just chip away at a steady pace and do that forever. That's like a diesel altruistic individual. Whereas I'm a F1 sports car when it comes to these kind of things. And so like I'm burning all the rubber, and I'm maximum velocity until I start getting bored. And so there's many different types of altruistic efforts. If we want to talk about cars, one day we were a jalopy, now we're a minor race car. And eventually, if we ever do become an F1 podcast, as F1 sports car podcast, I'll already be looking beyond the horizon at that point, because I don't need to wear a cape. I don't need a disguise. I don't even want to wear, the magic boots that everyone recognizes as, well, he's a podcaster with the magic boots. I don't need accoutrements. And that's why I've been pushing back so hard on merch. I don't want merch. Merch to me is a distraction. that isn't the identity of what we're doing. The velocity is more what I'm interested in. I hope that makes sense.
Absolutely. Steve, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I really appreciate and value that idea of the diesel versus the F1, because I think ferocity is a really, really important term. And I'm glad it came up, because if we have the ability to identify within ourselves what type of altruism we operate with, then that will help us select and find where our skills are most useful, right? Like there's the like-mindedness. We find each other for sure. If somebody like the character that I know, that's the perfect description of him. He is the diesel. He just chugs away, and he does so tirelessly, and he has an ability and a staying power that none of us really understand. And I am very different than that. I am much more of a high RPM. I'm going to give everything I have until I have a little bit of a moment where I need. And the term I've been using is social capital. Like, at the end of some days, I am out of social capital. My passion for what it is I'm working on is steady on. There's resolve there. Whether it's a mental health walk, whether it's working with my kids at school, which I do tirelessly in terms of their strength and conditioning. But what I'm learning and appreciating more is that I have a sense of how much I have to give and for how long. And then I'm getting better at resetting before I re-engage. And that, to me, is what's allowing me to have more staying power and more purposeful effort, as opposed to just spinning and burning rubber, which is obviously needed at times, without a doubt. But now I have a better idea of how to reset and rebuild, so that I don't. And I'll be a little negative here for a second. I've had moments in my career where my altruism has sort of driven me a little bit in the ditch, where I've thought to myself, I'm failing at this. And what I've learned is that it wasn't failure that I was experiencing. It was burnout that I was experiencing. And then I go back to my mental health toolkit, and I now have tools and ways of rebuilding, or maybe resetting my effort, so that I can engage in a more steady and more successful way long term, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. Seb, what are you thinking?
He who has a why can bear almost anyhow. I really like this, because it's as we all familiar with the quote, but at the end of the day, I do believe that fundamentally we need to have the reason cemented there. Like, what is this for, and how can we proliferate it, and is there a way to change it and maintain the original intent? But like Shaun, I'm exactly the same way, in case you never noticed, because there's still people questioning why I left, when my career was on such an upswing, because I want to do other things. It's that simple. I want to do other things. I'll continue helping people, but I want to do it in a different format. I want to do other things. Now, here's another important piece of that: succession planning. And we're talking about succession planning ad nauseum here, but if you're in an organization that's responsible for succession planning, you may or may not have a lot of pull or say in that. And that's cool. That's a completely different scenario. If you're not responsible for succession planning, you're still responsible to ensure that succession planning is happening. Like I don't know how many times I was on the horn with the powers that be to say, who's our next person? What are we? Because right now, as I see it, if this person goes, or if I'm going, we have no way to sustain that. So to think that, or because it's organization led, that we have no say in the succession planning is a misnomer. It's not accurate. Am I still here?
Yeah, you're still here.
Okay, I can't. Okay. So anyways, so something, I got super distracted, but it's something that's important, right? Like, so maybe I'm not personally responsible for succession planning, but I'm responsible for succession planning, and therefore I need to engage with the right people so that they start setting their minds straight in the context of that. Now, with that, there's another piece in this, and this is something that I spoke recently with Emily on the What's Your 20 podcast, and it had to do with being in a passenger seat. And so, if I put an initiative on, such as the mental health walk, my goal is to teach everybody who's attending them pieces of ownership of that walk, because I don't want them to be in the passenger side of a car and go to the same location 900 times and turn around not knowing how to get there because they put their brain on autopilot. And so the succession planning piece is also about the education piece of the little things along the way that make this different, and their engagement being taking ownership of the group of the newbies coming in and all of those things, to the point where the group itself sees the value in continuing to do the things that you have set forth for them, to the point where perhaps ownership is now, something that people want to do, or they've already set their mind to, what are we going to do if Seb gets hurt, if he gets one of his 75 surgeries, and all of those things. And so that's, I think, a really, really important piece also, is to really give all the little things along the way. So that, think of it this way: when I was on the team for the longest time, if you said to me, you're going to be leading this call, like you're the lead on this call, I would have been like, I have no idea, right? I have no idea what to do. I have no idea what the priorities necessarily are. I can keep people generally safe, but administration of a call is completely different. But as I develop as a leader, and as I develop and problem solves this little piece, and helped with this little piece, and helped with this other piece, I ended up building a foundation that was solid enough that one day I was able to say, I could lead this now. But if this hasn't happened, and the person that's leading it hasn't been an active participant in making that happen, you're looking down the barrel of, something you don't want to be looking down to.
Now, I really love where this is going. I appreciate everything you guys are saying. It reminded me of a joke when you were talking there, Seb, was, Grandpa Joe died peacefully in his sleep, but the 5 other people in the car did not. And I just love the fact of, like, that concept of being a passenger it's such a great concept, because you have no control. You have zero control for what's happening. You're just there, and you will suffer the consequences of whatever the driver puts you through. So, what do you got, Shaun?
Unless I'm sitting in the passenger seat right next to the driver, and I'm paying attention to Grandpa Joe.
Yeah.
There's no way that car's crashing, because I'm situationally aware of my surroundings at all times in my life, in anything that I do, whether it's industry, whether it's pastime, whatever it is, I'm paying attention to what's going on around me. So that car ain't crashing. That's just a thought. Moving on to another thought on the transition planning. We can plan all that we want, but eventually you've got to draw a drop-dead line in the sand. Because my wife just went through it. Over 2 years ago, she put her resignation in. I'm going to be retiring. You need to find someone to replace me. And they said, well, just give us a month and just give us some time. That was 2 years ago. Well, she just retired on October 27th after 2 years of being told, just give us another. And now she's being replaced by 3 people. And so will they be able to do her job? Probably not, because her job she's been doing for over a decade, almost in absence of any leadership, because she was a leader herself. And so I'm not sure how they're going to transition with 3 people. And the only reason they decided to go that direction with we will replace her is because my wife drew a drop-dead line in the sand this time. And so for myself, as an example, when I was teaching, or when I was a student, computer system engineer student, and I had to take over my class with it, could you just cover the class for today until we get a replacement tomorrow? That went on for years until I was teaching day class, night class, and running the entire school. And so where did I draw my line in the sand? I looked at the owner and said, that's my last class. No, we'll fly you down to Mexico. We'll do whatever. Spend 10 days. We'll pick up the tab. And I looked at him and said, dude, you can spend as much money as you want, but I'm done. If you want to go to Mexico with me and have some fun, we'll do that. But that ain't going to change my mind. And it didn't, because I have a drop dead line in the sand. When I look at Chance and say, dude, you now have the keys to the sports car and you won't crash it because you've been in the co-pilot seat all this time and know how it's done. Well, if it does crash, I'll look over and say, do you need a tow? how can I help with a tow? But I ain't rebuilding the car again, and I ain't going to drive it again. Chance will figure it out, as will everyone alongside of him figure it out. But when I draw my line in the sand, that is it. And to Seb's point, he makes himself available, as will I. But I will not be putting on my back cape and running straight over to the ditch that the car crashed in, hauling it out and trying to drive it down the road again, because I will be onto another thing. And so we do need a drop dead line in the sand when it comes to things like altruism, I feel.
Absolutely. Matt, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I was kind of brainstorming listening to you guys is, if I'm ever fortunate enough to start an initiative that has a lot of buy-in with folks to improve them, whether it's their well-being, their wellness, or any other thing. I think that transition planning, the earlier you can start thinking about these things, and the earlier you can start looking at your peers and then allowing them the opportunity to do more and more to help that initiative, the more transition planning is going to be easy, because very quickly, rather than having one person who is sort of this idea, you're going to have your peers alongside you that can all add meaningful feedback to whatever it is you're doing, so that when it is time for you to transition again, you can just take less and less on and put the people or allow the people that have put themselves in a position to be very capable at the helm of that. So it's a sort of a soft transition, more of a long game, as opposed to it is to all of a sudden turn that light switch off and say, hey, here you go, don't crash the car.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I have a question on this. Any other thoughts, though, before I jump into this question? No? Okay. So, how do we apply this to ourselves? We've been talking about organizations. We've talked about being altruistic. We've been talking about the external proxy, right? We've been talking always about like how do we're helping others. We're succession planning. We're doing all this other stuff. But when we apply it to ourselves, how do we apply that altruistic concept to our helping ourselves get better? How do we take all this knowledge that we've just done over the last 50 minutes and then reverse it and point it towards us? Seb, I'm going to put you on the fire.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I grasp exactly what you are asking, but the things that you are doing in the context, the things that you are doing in any context that serves the purpose of helping the collective, and done in an altruistic way for perhaps a byproduct of feeling good about yourself, are things that are going to be critically important that apply to you, right? Like, so you can't I think it's important. There's a bit of self-preservation there that needs to happen, and that's for me to have the ability to live life the way that I prescribe it, because that can turn into something that truly is a problem now. So you're really good at coaching others. You're really good at having the conversations. You're really good at helping. You're really good at all of those things, but you're so out of practice on the home front that it's just a matter of time before adversity hits you, and now you can no longer walk the walk. So I think, and this goes back to the old, I'd rather be a warrior in the garden. And my rebuttal was always, stay in the garden too long and you'll be a gardener in no time. Like you have to have the ability to, to go back and make sure that those things are still not only of the occasion and relevant, but also that you are still applying them in your own life. And sometimes, introspection is the word of the day. Introspection in absolutely everything we do. And so having that self-awareness and being able to self-regulate and say, I'm actually off track right now. And I've done that before. But I've realized that I started something for whatever reason, and I was helping for whatever reason, and I was doing everything I did for a very particular reason. And along the way, somehow lost the mission statement. Along the way, lost where it is that I was going. And so now you start sort of flying around aimlessly. If you ever get a chance to watch Woman King, one of my favorite part is one of the newbies comes in, and she is absolutely full of fire and just wants to fight everybody and do everything. And she starts going everywhere and running everywhere. And one of the girls stops her and calls her Tsetse, a little fly. You're like a little fly. You're flying around as fast as you can, but you don't know where you are going. And it's just the perfect, it was the perfect comment, because it's true. And we've seen it if you've been in tactical units, and you'll see these people coming in. And so I guess for me, it's all about, do I still walk the walk? Am I still capable of holding my space? And if the answer is no to any of those things, then we have the cost benefits reverse and the priorities of life. I have to be first, right? I have to be. This is kind of like putting your oxygen mask on before you put it on anybody else. And so that analogy is perhaps overused, but it's the best way to exemplify it, my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. Steve, what about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I like that idea a lot of you can't just talk the talk, you have to walk the walk. And for me, that became pretty apparent a couple years ago when things just personally were getting to a place where I was doing my work and I was doing it with all the passion of 1,000 suns, but it felt empty to me. Like the work wasn't validating or making me feel very good about the day. Like when I lay my head down on the pillow, I had more questions than I had answers. And what I had to do was I had to look at self and go, okay, what would I tell my kids? Or what would I tell a friend? What would I tell Matt? What would I tell Jack? And what that did is it put me in a position where I just had to reach out and get some help, because I wasn't seeing things through clear enough lenses. Like the eyes I was looking through were a little bit foggy for sure. And so for me, that meant reaching out and sitting with a counselor and just having a fella that I could just talk to, who didn't know any of the history, didn't know any of my intentions. He was just there to listen to what I had to say. And it's funny because I've built kind of a funny little relationship with him, because I sat down on the first day and said, I don't know where to start. Like, how do we do this? And he goes, aren't you a high school teacher? And I was like, yep. And he goes, well, don't you tell kids to go see the counselor all the time? And I said, yeah, pretty much on the daily. And he goes, what do you tell them? And I said, I just tell them to go sit down and start talking. So he said, well, why don't you take some of your own advice? And that was interesting, because what it did was it was somebody who not only held me accountable, but it was somebody who was making me responsible. Like we had talked about that before, like accountability is a feeling, responsibility is an action. And so I had to become accountable to myself by feeling what I was feeling, and then be responsible by actually doing the work. And I feel like what that did is it helped me reframe where I was at and the work that I was doing to a place of relative purity, like the altruistic nature of it. Like and we've talked about this with shared adversity, right? Like when you share hardship with somebody, you build a connection. And that's what I find very fulfilling about the work that I do. And now that I have a clear lens to look through about my why and about my reset skills and my tools that I have to make sure that I don't get burnt out again. And is it still possible? Of course. Does it need constant check-ins and constant work? Of course. Am I grateful for people like Matt and Chance and Seb and Shaun? Of course, because they're part of my accountability team, I would say. But what it does is it just lets me make sure that I'm taking care of myself first, so that the work that I do, I can do with all the altruism that I can bring to the table. And when we think about ownership, I just want to come back to one idea real quick. It's like altruism, truly to do something selflessly for others, is to arm them with the ability to do it for themselves. That's really what that feels very important to me. And so if I have healthy boundaries and I'm doing my job well, and then literally the win is I get to give somebody else the tools to do that for themselves, and then they can carry on that altruism.
Absolutely. Matt, you got any thoughts on this at all?
Yeah, I think so. I've been, again, listening and brainstorming simultaneously. I know our own minds are vacuums, right? And if your brain's anything like mine, crippled with ADD, it's moving at about 1,000,000 miles an hour, and things are happening faster than you can, stay on one topic. But if you are practicing what you're preaching to others, you will undoubtedly surround yourself with people who have the same values as you, right? In terms of today altruism, right? And I think that for me, one thing that's important is to remember that if I'm altruistic or try to be, and I'm surrounding myself with people who I know echo those traits and or are striving to reach out to them and bounce things off them, or make sure I am truly, again, practicing what I'm preaching, but going to those people that I trust. Because if I sit in my own brain and try to think about concepts or ideas or what I'm doing or what I think I'm not doing, and it's just really easy to get lost in questioning, what your why is and what you're doing. And I'm very fortunate that I have people that I are able to bounce these things off on a very, very regular basis that make sure that I'm squared away. I'm practicing what I'm preaching, and I can always do better at that. But then that I can then take that, circle back into investing in other folks once I'm sure that I'm also investing in myself. So yeah, not being afraid to reach out to your peers who are sharing your values and make sure that you're aligned and doing things properly.
Absolutely. Now we are just over time right now, so let's get some. I just want to say first off, thank you guys for the conversation, because this has been awesome. It's been a really great conversation. I enjoyed it a lot. Let's get some final thoughts, and then we can shut it down for the afternoon. And we'll start with Steve. Work our way down. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I love the fact that I'm surrounded by people that have truly good intentions, and I think that my filter is getting better as I get on in years of working with people that I consider to be true believers, in terms of whether it's a concept like the collective, or whether it's just personal health and wellness and self-care. Like, I'm grateful to have folks that I've distilled down into a pretty tight unit. And I also feel like when we think about altruism, just keep the idea at the center of it, that it's to arm others with the abilities to take care of themselves, right? Like, our altruism exists to help others develop their own. And I get really excited about doing that work. And yeah, I think I love the idea of seeing somebody take on ownership of their own altruism.
Absolutely. Matt, final thoughts?
Yeah, I again sort of to echo what Steve said, right? To be altruistic obviously is to be selfless, right? But if you're doing it with the good intentions, and somebody said this earlier, um, it feels really good when you're able to impart something on somebody, and you're able to give a piece of yourself to them in order to allow them to be successful, and then you see that carry forward in what they're doing. It's not a better feeling in the world than to know that your pure intentions and actions were hopefully given at a time when that person was able to better themselves because of that. And people are coming to me, it's because they need an ear or whatever it may be. So then to have them be successful after that is it's okay to have that feeling. It doesn't mean you're selfish for getting that kind of reaction after being practicing altruism. It just means that you're doing it for right intentions, and you're proud of seeing what people are doing after you've been able to listen or lend a hand or whatever capacity you've maybe been able to do it in.
Yeah, absolutely. Seb, final thoughts?
Yeah, like I put a lot of emphasis on succession planning today, but really at the end of the day, it's one of those things. I truly believe in what it is that I've taken on. So, for example, if we look at the mental health walk, because I know it helps people. If I run it for 3 years, I run it for 3 years. If I run it for 15, I run it for 15. It really doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it's a success story in my own mind with respect to providing some individual the ability to make their lives better and give them mechanism that they can employ in their own lives and the lives of the people around them to make it better. If I've worked everything I could to have a proper succession planning, and somehow it just so happened that walk no longer is, that, unfortunately isn't on me, kind of deal. And it's not about taking blame or any of that. It's about, did I do everything I could for the time that I had influence over this, that I could, impact the direction and all of those other things? And if the answer is yes, then that's all I can ask myself. I'm not wearing the outcome. When I was in law enforcement, we used to arrest the worst of the worst, and some guys would go nuts over what happened in court. How is that within your span of control? And how can you're not wearing that? You did what you had to do in the context of what you could to make it as good as you could for the collective, and somebody else took the conch and ran right into the ditch. There's really nothing you can do about that. And so, yes, grace is a good thing to have in that case. And if we look at Afghanistan, for example, we have veterans going out there thinking all of this was for nothing, when really it provided a safety window for 20 years, where for 20 years people were able to experience things they would have never experienced either after or before. And so for me, I think it's an oversimplification, but for a period of time, it was truly impactful and beneficial.
Yeah, 100%. It's actually interesting you say that, because I'm wearing my "It's not a waste" shirt. It was not a waste shirt, but absolutely. Shaun, final thoughts?
Yeah, it was a waste. It was a waste. It was a waste for every single veteran that was over there, unless they took something away from it for themselves. Now I'm pausing for effect. So I like altruism. I like helping people. It's not so much that it makes me feel good. I just like seeing people do better. That's it. That's all. And if they don't want to engage in that, well, so be it. But I like helping people. And Chance, you'd asked earlier, well, what's in it for us? Well, what's in it for us is what it teaches me as I'm trying to be altruistic. I'm not going to bore anyone with the details of what it took for me to get to this seat on time with barely a second to spare. I had a river of sweat running down my spine as I sat down. It was a gong show, but here I am making an effort to commit to being altruistic in the moment. And what it teaches me is my conviction on why I want to help people. So if there's no cost to me to be altruistic, then really am I learning anything? The sweat, the blood, and the tears to get here on time, that's the cost. And that's what teaches me if I should be doing something or not. So to take it back to Afghanistan, I think before anyone hops on a plane and flies over there, they should know why they're flying there. You shouldn't go over there to figure it out. You should know before you get on a plane. And when you come back, all those years later, you should still know why. Nothing's changed. Did your why change? If so, then you had the wrong why before you flew. So if your why was strong, your why is still strong. And if you start losing your why because of the news, because of the media cycle, because of what your buddy's telling you down the street, or because of a t-shirt that someone gives you, well, those are all proxies that are external to you. If it was important once, it'll be important till the end of time, as long as you chose the right why. So if someone's struggling with these kind of things, I would suggest that you sit down quietly with yourself with a pen and paper and re-engage that why. And if your why has changed, then make your now why important enough that these kind of things are less impactful to you as the new cycle spins year after year.
Bam. Dropping the mic from the other side of the planet, right? Just doing it. Awesome. And you are absolutely correct. I'm not gonna say absolutely correct. I understand your point 100%. Really do appreciate the conversation, Matt, Steve, Seb. This was fantastic. I don't really have any pithy statements to finish on. I think it was just a really great conversation. So I know I learned. I'm going to build upon what I learned, and I'm going to grow tomorrow with us on the collective every day. We'll see y'all tomorrow. Chimo.